If you're new to these, welcome. Give a brief intro, and if you're not, then I apologize for now the 11th intro of myself that I've given over the last little over a year, but this is the last of these webinars. I'm Kait Boyle. I am a co-founder of Bikepacking Roots. I found bikepacking as a way to explore and adventure and landscape in a human-powered way while recovering from an ankle injury back in 2011. And I started off riding the Great Divide mountain bike route on my single speed, and that eventually led to teaching a college course on bikepacking, traveling the world bikepacking, doing some ultra racing, and ultimately realizing that for me, it's one of the best ways to engage with other communities and landscapes, either close to home or really far from home. And these days, one of my greatest passions is being able to share a lot of the experience and skills I've developed over the past 14-ish years. And in doing so, I get to draw on a former career in adventure education. And this workshop is the ride part of our Eat, Sleep, Ride series this winter. And we're going to talk about preventing and preparing for bikepacking mechanicals. One plug is that last year in our 8-part series that Noelle referenced, there were a number of different webinars that went deeper into some of these topics. And we did have a whole Fixed in the Field webinar too, where Leah from Upshift Cycles gave a great virtual tutorial on some actual basic mechanical repair. And so I highly recommend checking that out, because I'm going to try not to talk about anything too redundant with past workshops. So when I'm thinking about mechanicals, I'm thinking about like the things that go wrong out there. And so in this workshop tonight, we're going to talk about bike mechanicals and body mechanicals and what to do when you have the unfixable. And so those are going to be the kind of the 3 sections of this. In bike mechanicals, we'll talk about common and uncommon mechanicals, how to prevent them, what to think about in a bike repair kit, and what skills to make sure you do know before you go bikepacking. And then with body mechanicals, we're going to talk about some common bikepacker ailments, things that can be mechanicals for our bodies, how to plan for those, and also how to prevent them, our own repair kits for the human bikepacker body, and again, some of the skills and knowledge to have before heading out. And then lastly, we'll talk about what to do if you can't fix it and when you need to leave your bikepacking trip to get help, or get help before even being able to leave. As Noelle mentioned, feel free to put any comments that you have or additions. Like, this is all based on my perspective and my experience, and there's a lot of wealth out here, and one of the wealth of knowledge out here in this group. And one of the personal highlights in over the last 11 webinars has been seeing people chime in with what works for them, and I've learned a lot as well. And this chat will be a living document that we'll share along with the live recording and an additional resource I'll send out later this week. So think about that, and any questions that you have between each of these sections, the 1, 2, and 3, I'll take questions and answer them that Noelle will read out. So without further ado, let's talk about the things that could go wrong with your bike. I wanted to start with this because when I talk to people wanting to get into bikepacking, this fear of knowing what to do when something goes wrong is one of the greatest barriers. And I totally understand, because I don't personally know how to fix everything that could go wrong. And I have, over the last 10 years, been learning how to fix things. And there was a time where like I really wouldn't have been able to fix very much on my bike. And so over the last decade or so, I've gathered a bit of perspective and kind of prioritized what I need to know, be able to keep my bike rolling in probable situations. But also talking to people, I've realized that there are a lot of things like what ifs out there that can be a little scary or paralyzing for folks when worrying about what to do if something catastrophic happens. And so we'll talk about that, but I want to start with just talking about like realistically what happens most often out there and then less common. So, and this is going to be in the context of starting off with a bike in good order, and we're going to talk about that pre-bike bike check in just a moment. But if you head out with a bike in good order and with some intentional decision around the parts that you're running or how you've set up your bike, then in my experience personally and in teaching and leading groups of other people on bikepacking trips, the most common mechanicals are tire punctures and sidewall tears, creaking, just like mysterious noises, um, rubbing rotors, shifting issues or your chain dropping, so just like not clean, precise shifting. Sometimes slipping dropper post, and I should say that this is like descending in probability or like commonality in my experience. And then the worn out drivetrain and worn brake pads. And those two asterisks for those mean that that is more common on really long trips where you're actually actively wearing out those parts because of the distance that you're riding, or if you're riding in a particularly muddy place, then the environment could be contributing to the worn out drivetrain or brake pads. But if you're starting a trip with brake pads and a drivetrain in good condition with plenty of life left, then you have quite a bit of time until this is a common mechanical. But those are basically the things that I've experienced more than once over the last decade plus, decade and a half. And then uncommon bike mechanicals are interesting because they're things that some of them are things we really prepare for, but in my experience, these don't happen very often. And that's bent derailleurs, like fully bent. And one thing people really like to think about is like, well, what if my derailleur explodes and I have to turn my bike into a single speed? And like, yes, that happens. We'll talk about how to prevent it. And in reality, it's not necessarily common. Snapped chains. I was talking to my friend and teammate Kurt the other day, and we were talking about snap chains, and it's like we haven't snapped a chain in a long time. And part of that is because of how much drivetrains have improved and how strong chains are. Part of that is how we ride. And so that could be a problem if you're running an older drivetrain. Single speeds tend to snap chains more, in my experience. And then broken wheels and spokes. Like it happens, but I wouldn't say it's common. I think I've broken one spoke, knock on wood, in the last decade and one wheel. Or like cracked the wheel, didn't break it. An unrepairable tire, I've personally never had one. Again, knock on wood. And then broken frames. I did finish my Great Divide ride in 2011 on my steel single speed and discovered 6 cracks in the frame afterwards, but the bike didn't break. And that is a vote for steel. And at the same time, like frames these days, like if it's not an old frame, which that was an old frame, like frames of all materials, carbon included, are very strong and capable of going bikepacking for a very long time. So this is where I categorize things based on my experience, and that informs both my repair kit and then also what I think about needing to have skill and knowledge-wise for bikepacking. So the first kind of, now that we've talked about those, first, how do we prevent them? The number one way, I think, to prevent mechanicals is to head out on a trip or really any like remote or long ride, having an awareness of the condition of your bike. Because the consequence of something failing is either your time and energy of repairing it or potentially like not being able to repair it. So these are the ABCDs of a bike check. Kurt and I are working on a different project that is a whole 12-part, 1 video per month series that's being shared by the Radivist this year on backcountry bike repair. And so those videos are going to be tutorials for each and every in the field skill, and it starts with the bike check that was released last month. That is live in the world right now. And so in that video, I think it's like 15 minutes long. We take you step by step through the entire video, and I'm going to go through these in concept. And if you want to go more deeply into how to do the bike check, you should check out that video. Um, and that also has my dog Hank, who I personally really think adds a lot to a video, and hopefully he won't be joining us for this webinar because that actually is quite disruptive. But so the air. So with air, we're thinking about our tires. We're thinking about any suspension that we have or anything else that has air, like a dropper post. Um, in that category, I'm thinking about the condition of my tires as well as tire pressure. For bikepacking trips, I really like to run pretty resilient tires, like in Maxxis EXO Plus type sidewall that is more durable and resistant to sidewall tears, rather than like the super lightweight ones. In part because they won't wear as quickly, and they are also going to handle the additional load and demands of bikepacking more. Um, for suspension, you'd want to just make sure everything is working well, and if you've added weight to your bike, then to adjust the pressure accordingly. For B, thinking about brakes, bearings, and bolts. With that, or again, just making sure that our brakes are working, that both levers are engaging the brakes, that the rotors are running cleanly, there isn't a wobble, creating a rub, that bearings are in good condition. If you don't know, like this is something a shop can look at for you, but that is especially if you're going out on a longer ride, like you have bearings in your hubs, you have bearings in your bottom bracket, you have bearings in your headset. If you have rear suspension, you probably have bearings as well. And so there are all these places that bearings need grease and just to have life in them. Because bearings do wear out. And that can end up leading to some of those mysterious creaks that sometimes we get. And then bolts, just want to go around and go through and make sure that all bolts are tight to torque specs provided by the manufacturer. Cables and cracks, which come through cleaning. So cables first with bike packing, like we want to make sure that everything's routed cleanly when we add bags, that the bags aren't pinching the cables and preventing the function of whatever that cable is doing, like shifting or braking or engaging a dropper post. And then cracks, like this is a pretty big one by just going out and cleaning your bike well, like not just a hose off, but like a scrub down and really looking under that bottom bracket shell, under the down tube, in between, like on the inside of the C stays and chain stays where the rear wheel is. Get an idea for the condition of your frame before you head out so that one, you can catch any micro cracks beforehand if there are any, and just to see like where is the paint like abraded or chipped away because of rocks or mud. And then drivetrain. This is going through just doing a thorough check of the shifting, making sure checking your chain length. The life of your chain, not the length. There's a really simple tool to check how much your chain is worn out. They stretch over time. And as chains stretch, they wear out what they are attached to, which is your front cogs or chain rings, and then the rear cassette or the cogs in the cassette. And so as your chain wears out, it will eventually wear out your chain rings and the cogs in your cassette. And then you suddenly have an entirely worn out drivetrain. If you replace your chain before it's out of life and wearing out those other parts, then your cassette and chain rings will last a lot longer. And a new chain is a lot less expensive than a new cassette. So, and then lastly, for S, suspension and squishy bits. That's just making sure that your dropper works and is staying up. Like if you're running a seat bag, make sure that when you add weight to that seat bag, that your dropper post still stays up and that the suspension has been serviced and within like it's within its service interval, because each type of suspension has a different amount of miles that it will run smoothly before the different parts of it need to be replaced. So for another part of setting of preventing mechanicals is thinking about how you've set up your bike. I touched on this with the tires, but having durable tires, frames, particularly carbon frames, can be abraded through the carbon by bike bags rubbing into them or by the cables rubbing into them. And you see this more common like at the front of the head tube underneath that handlebar roll, like you can see in this picture where my handlebar bag is pushed against my head tube. If that frame wasn't protected there over a long time, I could catastrophically wear through this to like, compromise the integrity of the head tube. It would take a while. But you don't want to do that. Bikes are expensive. Um, and so something simple you can do is just to protect the frame with some frame protecting tape, and that can help also protect it from like little rocks flying up and nicking the top coat and any of that rub and wear. For thinking about wheels and preventing punctures or broken or cracked rims, like tire pressure goes a really long way. It is like a hard hit that's going to hit your rim that will cause your rim to crack. Like your rim is highly unlikely to crack without a really hard, sharp impact. And your tires are protecting that rim from that. And that's why like higher volume tires can be really good. Running inserts can also be a consideration. Like those are really effective at protecting the rims and can improve the riding experience. Um, and again, like tire burliness is a factor. And then lastly, just mounting bags with intention. Like not only can they rub on your bike, but they can also do things like if they're not mounted well, they could get caught in a moving part of your bike, which could one, break a part of your bike or cause some sort of mechanical, like by a bag rotating into your front wheel, like breaking spokes. But they can also cause even higher consequence injuries. And I have witnessed someone go flying over the handlebars, going from about 20 miles an hour straight onto his face because the bag that was mounted to his fork leg rotated into his wheel and stopped him instantly. And it was really terrifying. And so then the last one is actually like how you take your bike out. Like, are the way, okay, bikes are incredibly capable. And when you add the weight of bike packing bags, it is adding to the impact that a bike will experience on different terrain. And so, the way that you like pump through really rough, rocky bits, or like would normally ride into or over like a sharp edge, or how you get air, those can impact how your bike handles it, and you could end up more likely to have a catastrophic tire issue, a wheel issue, like really bottoming out your suspension, that sort of thing, just because of riding maybe like too aggressively. And so this isn't to say that you can't ride assertively or confidently while bike packing, but it's something when you're heading out, like I like to just get a feel for how my bike feels and how it's handling before I just fully send it into terrain that's going to ask for it to perform to its full ability. And that's where I also get a better sense for like, for that load that I'm carrying, is my tire pressure good? Is it bottoming out my suspension? Should I add pressure and things like that? And it's more of a progression of like starting by riding pretty light and then getting a better feel for how my bike's handling the additional weight. If I can manage the additional weight of the bike, and going from there. Once you're out riding and at camp, you can prevent mechanicals and also monitor for them by just taking care of your bike at night. And this often reminds me of like horsepacking, which I haven't actually personally ever horsepacked, but I grew up riding horses and horses require a lot of care. Like every night and morning, they need to get taken care of. And especially when you're out on a multi-day trip with them, like you need to make sure that they're getting taken care of so that the expedition or trip can get carried on. And our bikes are that way too. They're just not going to be as fussy for the first few days if you don't take care of them when you're at camp. The first thing, like if there's one thing that you do, I would encourage you to just maintain your drivetrain at night rather than just like as you need to during the day. But just stop at camp, lean your bike against a tree, have someone hold it, whatever it takes, and just clean that chain, wipe off the chain ring, wipe off the pulleys on the derailleur, and re-lube it. And if especially if you're in a wet environment, make sure you dry it too. Um, the next thing that I think about is like all the other stuff that's dirty and moving on my bike, and that's primarily suspension. And I take my little chain ring that I carry with me and I wipe off the seals around my suspension and my dropper post so that it's not just building up more and more dust and dirt that's getting worked into the suspension. Um, Checking bolts every few days, and then especially if you hear any sort of rattle or creak, like checking those bolts. And then I know it can be hard when you're bike packing, but especially if you're staying anywhere in town. Um, a lot of like hotels, Airbnbs, hostels like have a hose or a bike wash. Bike shops often have bike washes. Bike parts and parks and resorts often have bike washes. Like, and even car washes just don't go like super high pressure, can work. But like, if you're on a long trip, taking the time to clean your bike can go a really long way in one, having a good pulse on how your bike is handling the trip, and then also just preventing mechanicals that could come from all that mud. Like mud, it can be very hard on bicycles. It's really fun to ride in the mud, but they do wear out parts really quickly. Like you could go through a pair of brake pads in just a day um, by riding in really muddy conditions and wear out drivetrains really quickly. So clean those bikes. Okay, the repair kit. I think people like to think about this like, what do you bring to deal with all the possible mechanicals? And so, first, let's think back to what those common mechanicals are. They are mostly fairly preventable, mostly tire related, drivetrain and shifting related, some kind of suspension related. Um, But a lot of those other ones that I mentioned were really more a result of like paying attention to cleaning your bike, setting yourself up for success with how you set up your bike, etc. So the repair kit is thinking about that, like what am I most likely to need to repair? And then some of those more uncommon things like a broken derailleur, bent derailleur hanger, a broken chain. Like we want to be ready to repair those because they're actually really pretty straightforward to do so. And then there's some things that like we just aren't going to repair in the field. And we'll talk about what to do when that's the case. So this repair kit, this is a big list. We're going to go through it with pictures in a moment. But what I want to show you and kind of impart on y'all is that I think of the repair kit in levels. And the first level is like the base level repair kit. We'll go to this picture now, which is what I would take on any bike ride. Like today, I rode for 45 minutes really close to my house. There's a neighborhood that within like 100 yards of any part of the ride. It was with Hank, my dog, and I had these things. As well, I could walk back like these few things, which are a tube, a pump, a plug kit for punctures, a tire lever, and a simple multi-tool. Like those 5 things are going to be able to repair most of those like really common things, which are like punctures, replacing like putting a tube into a tire, um, and then adjusting bolts, which is part of the like finicky shifting. In this picture, the lower part of this pump is the plug kit. It's a wolf tooth pump, and when you pull this out, you have the like jabby needle thing for the plug and the darts, the bacon strips. So this is the basic level. Like when we go bikepacking, we bring this. When I go on a 30-minute ride, I bring this. And when bikepacking in a group, I still have everyone bring this stuff because this is what you would need to fix anything that comes up quickly. They're quick fixes. You do it trailside. And the people who are like a half a mile ahead because you stopped, like they don't necessarily have to come back. And then we go into the bigger kit that grows kind of the longer and more remote the trip gets. And this is organized from left to right of the screen with like what I'd add, depending on like how long or remote the trip is. And then the longer it gets or more remote it gets, the more of these other things I bring. So, and this even applies to long day rides. Like sometimes I would bring chain lube and a derailleur hanger and quick links. Like basically any ride that is not walking distance back to the car, like I bring those things. As well as a multi-tool that has a chain tool on it, like a small one. And then suddenly I have the ability to fix most tire issues, loom by chain, like take care of finicky shifting issues, replace a bent derailleur hanger, replace or fix a broken chain. And that's a lot of different things that I could do. And then as this gets longer and the trip gets longer or more remote and farther away from access to bike shops or other help, then I'm starting to bring things to like really fix some of those other things that are maybe less likely. This would include bringing a suspension pump, like with time, I might need to add suspension to my fork or rear shock. Bike pumps generally can't do that. Zip ties are great for fixing a lot of things. That little red thing with like the horseshoe shaped thing with this other little tool, these are two different spoke wrenches, and spoke wrenches don't fit all spokes. So, or I should say, depending on your kind of spoke would depend on the kind of spoke wrench that you need. So that's worth making sure that you have one that works for your bike. A spare cleat. My actual like most recent mechanical was in the Fat Pursuit bike race, and my cleat ripped out of my boot and went flying into the powder snow to never be found again. And I didn't actually have a spare cleat. But it's a really easy thing, just a bolt and a cleat for your pedal if you're riding clipless for your shoe. These tiny little pliers that have a knife, they have little pliers, they have little scissors, they have a little like file. These are invaluable. A lot of micro chain tools that come on multi-tools are actually really, really hard to twist and turn just with your grip strength. And so before you leave home, make sure you can actually use your chain tool. And if not, a little pair of pliers could help. Pliers are also, in my experience, critical for any sewing of tires. And they serve a lot of purposes. They're also like good pot grips. The scissors act as good fingernail cutters. Extra plug strips or bacon strips for your plug kit. This little Presta Schrader adapter is tiny and really incredible for like a lot of, I think all tubeless tire setups that I'm aware of are Presta valves, and a lot of tubes are Presta valves. And so whereas at gas stations, the air that you'd use to fill your tile, that head is for a Schrader valve, which is like what comes in your car tire. And so this adapter makes it so that you don't need a special head to add air from like a compressor. And so those can even live on the bike if you want them to. Speaking of that, a spare valve core in here, those bend really easily. And if you lose one, you're like really upset or sad. And then farther along, we're getting deeper into tire repair. We've got tire boots for sidewalls. If you're hopefully you're eating and have a candy wrapper or a bar wrapper, but like that or even a dollar bill, though I'd never really want to put money in my tire, like those can be good boots for sidewall tears. Which is why I don't see many in this kit because like you can make improvise with what you have, like the trash you have. In this is really hard to see picture, but this curve is a curved needle. It's an upholstery needle that I got at like Michael's or Joann Fabrics. There's also a straight needle, and it's just protected inside Gorilla Tape so that it's not puncturing other things in my repair kit. And it hasn't been used in years, so at this point it's probably really sticky. But that's taped to the side of the exterior packet of more bacon strips. We have really strong thread. Floss can work, but like a strong upholstery thread or like the thread that would come in a speedy stitch is really good. Like you don't want it tearing. Patch kits that work with your tubes. Um, a little roll of Gorilla Tape, like not a roll, but like wrapped on like a little pencil or something or on itself. Maybe like a 3 feet yard of Gorilla Tape. A whole valve stem that's a spare bolts for different parts of my bike, for where bolts could come out, spare brake pads. And then these tools are different examples of other multi-tools you may bring. The main thing with multi-tools when choosing one is to make sure that every Allen fits into the place on your bike that you need the Allen to fit. And like bikes can have like pretty deep holes where the Allen, the head of the bolt is like really nested deep down. And some of these multi-tools, like when you actually unfold them, the length of the Allen may not be long enough to reach in without the body of the tool hitting the frame or whatever part of your bike you're trying to get work around. Brake calipers, that can be a common place where like you can't actually get on the rear brake caliper the head of the Allen key into it and then like to turn the multi-tool effectively. Or like maybe you only get like 1/20th of a turn at a time. Or another common place where multi-tools don't fit well or like into the bolts um, at the seat post clamp with the saddle. Those can be really recessed. And then, sealant, I don't carry sealant anymore. I've never really needed to, or like in the worst case, like maybe I've slowly run out of sealant because of a slow leak. And then if I'm like resupplying at some point, then and there's a bike shop, then I would like top sealant off. But like it hasn't ever been a part of how I fix a tire and make it rideable again in the field. And then for like bigger groups, um, I sometimes just bring a bigger pump than like really tiny field pumps. Or if like you're expecting maybe more tire pressure adjusting, like a higher volume pump. So that's the repair kit. The video on the Radavis that's coming out next week is breaking all of this down again, so you can check that out. I think I already gave you all my pro tips. Oh, the last one was just that in this repair kit, there are some bike specific parts to consider. So if you're changing bikes or if you're riding in a group, and sharing your repair kit, which I want to talk about that for a moment in a moment. Some things to make sure that you have that work for your bike specifically are your derailleur hanger, the quick links for your chain, and the spare bolts. Yeah, those things. As far as this kit goes, if you are traveling in a group or even with like two people, like everyone doesn't need all of this. What I recommend is that everyone brings this, the very basic repair kit, to, fix a flat and make an adjustment on the go. But then this bigger repair kit, like everyone doesn't need to be carrying needle and thread and the chain tool and the suspension pump and the pack pliers. And like you don't need 3 derailleur hangers if you all have the same derailleur hanger. Like those things, it's really worth collaborating on. And like when I bike pack with like my best friend, we just carry one of these repair kits and then we both have the basic kit. So the tools that you have are only as useful as your knowledge to use them. Um, and we don't, in workshop number 8 last year, Leah taught some of these skills. This YouTube series on the Radivus is going to teach all of these skills as well. And we have a lot to talk about tonight, so we're not going to go through specifically how to do any of these. But when you think about like what are the common skills and what would help you feel maybe empowered to go out on your own with your own knowledge and skills for bike repair or with someone of similar experience, the first thing to learn is fixing flats. Fixing flats, like plugging punctures, dealing with a sidewall tear, and putting a tube into a tire. And that would be the same as if you run tubeless tires or tires with tubes. Those are skills to work on fixing regardless of what setup you have. Adjusting your shifting. This one is like kind of my nemesis personally, but there are some simple tricks to improve things while out. Adjusting your brake calipers to address rubbing of your rims or your rotors, depending on what kind of brake you have. Replacing brake pads. This is a skill only that you need if you are going on a trip long enough or into conditions that would deem wearing through brake pads. Otherwise, starting with fresh brake pads, that's not as high of a priority. Swapping the derailleur hanger. It's actually really easy on all the bikes that I've moved derailleur hangers on. It's easy to do, and I've never had to do it. Like I've only done it to put a new one on for a bike that I'm selling, so it's new for the person. So good to know, but not good to know, not hard, and probably not needed. But could be a game changer. Fixing a broken chain. This is another one that's like really easy to do once you practice it and you can practice it in your home with a worn out chain. If you just go to a bike shop and ask for a worn out chain, they should give it to you because otherwise they're just throwing it out. And you can just sit there and practice breaking the chain, putting a quick link in and breaking the chain. And it's like actually pretty easy once you get the hang of it, and good opportunity to test that tool that you're bringing. And then troubleshooting creaking. Okay, what questions do we have about bike mechanicals, preventing them, preparing for them?
Yeah, there's a couple questions. Two sort of related questions about tire pressure. Should you run a different tire pressure than recommended for with heavier loads? How much? What's your rule of thumb there? And then someone was asking specifically with a medium load, what tire pressure would you generally run for 2.4 to 2.6 inch tires?
Yeah. Um, so I don't have a number that I go by because it depends on the weight added to the bike, and which would include my body weight and the gear. It includes the wheel size, and the tire dimension, which it seems like they're aware of, which is awesome. There is a tool out there that Wolftooth has made and has been perfecting quite a bit, which is their tire pressure calculator. And a lot of wheel manufacturers have their own tire pressure calculator for their wheel brand. Like I know NV has one. I'm sure there are other ones that I'm not thinking of. DT Swiss, I think, has one. But that is a great place to start. And then a rule of thumb for like what I'm feeling out there, because I don't bring a tire pressure gauge. Like the pumps that I bring bike packing don't have a gauge, and I don't carry the little gauge with me when I'm out bike packing. So my rule of thumb for it feeling right is that I don't want to feel the rim. Like if I feel the rim at all, I'm adding air. But for the terrain, I do want it to be relatively lower, like as low as I can go without risking the integrity of the rim on dirt, because your traction is going to be better if you're running like a bit lower pressure. So if I feel like I'm on a basketball and I'm just like bouncing off of things in the trail, then I feel like I probably have too much pressure. And then on roads, I just tend to air up because there's less rolling resistance. Well, although they, I think, have proven that there's actually an ideal pressure for rolling resistance, but it is generally higher for roads than on trail. So I know that's kind of a not non-answer, but the tire pressure calculators are a great place to start because you'll have to input all those things.
There's a question, someone did chime in with one answer at asking about what type of insert you were referring to in wheels.
Yeah, so inserts in general now are like have come into the bike world mostly by way of like downhill racing and enduro racing. Is they are, if you think of like a pool noodle, you know, the pool toy, and you were to like turn that into a circle and make it the diameter of your rim, that's what they look like. And they go and they sit inside your rim, over the rim tape and underneath the tire. And they're basically adding this like whole foam-esque material cushion to the inside of your wheel. And so what it does is it allows you to run lower pressure, while hugely reducing the likelihood of flatting because of how it like adds rigidity to the sidewall. Like the sidewall is less likely to fold and bend and pinch. You know, like a lot of a common uh tire mechanical would be like a pinch flat, or a common flat type is a pinch flat where the rim kind of like the tire folds on itself on the rim and it's like a snake bite and you have two holes. And those can be kind of a pain to plug because the whole one hole is often at a rim. So these inserts are really good at preventing that type of flat. And then they will also really protect the rim. And so for like if you think about downhill and enduro racing and how abusive that terrain is and how hard those riders ride, like they're really generally smashing through things. And it's a great opportunity for bike packers to take that technology and apply it because like we're adding weight. We want our bike to perform well, but we also don't want to risk damaging our rims or breaking spokes. So there are a number of different brands out there. I think the most like common like household name now for cyclists are like is Cushcore. But there are a lot of different brands. You can look into them and they'll be like, and there's gravel inserts, there's XC lightweight inserts, there's trail inserts, and that's all just gonna like speak to the diameter of the rim and like how much weight, for lack of a better word, they add, but they don't add much weight.
There's another question about best practices for packing a bike when flying. Specifically, they asked about, is it worth removing rotors, which I answered yes, because I've seen we just had to help someone on our last trip that had bent rotors, and that's happened to us before. So unless you have a special, like they do make sort of either the bike bag or other ways to protect rotors, but it's also good to just take them off and pack them in your clothes, or that's usually what I do. And also taking off derailleur hangers. That's another what I usually do. But I don't know if you have any other tips for packing bikes for flying or other travel.
Yeah, that's a really good question because now thinking about it, probably the most damage my bikes have experienced over the course of my career has been in travel or shipping. And so the best thing you can do is just really protect everything. Like, don't skimp on the padding. And like, if I ever have like a sleeping pad or sleeping bag, like anything that you can use to pad your bike and protect it from itself. Because even if you turn and put your handlebars in the right place, like TSA is probably going to pull them out and then put them against the frame and they're going to like rub into the frame and crack the frame, which has happened to my bicycle. And I completely agree with like I always pull my rotors off. The one time I didn't because I was like, oh, this bike case has this like special padding around where the rotors go, like a rotor bent. So it's worth taking them off. I do, if you have center lock rotors, like that is a tool that you need to think about having on hand when you're flying, to put those back on. And 6-bolt rotors are great, although tedious for that reason. I also drop, I just undo the bolt that the derailleur goes into the derailleur hanger, and then the derailleur just is flopping off the cable, which is fine. It, again, it just has to be padded really well. And then, pressure is hard. Like air protects your wheels, and you do have to take air out of your wheels for flying. And so I just like that's where cush core could be an additional or an insert could be additional protection for the rim, but just like really padding around those wheels carefully, and even like propping them up from the underside. And mechanical wise, oh, putting a spacer into if you're running disc brakes, putting a spacer in your calipers so that as the levers get pulled, they're not closing the calipers inside the box. Because then you'd have to spread them and like reseat them and um either just a lot of bikes come with these, but they're like orange little prong things that go into the calipers, or even just like finding some cardboard and taping it and just like to the width that your calipers are open and stuffing it in there and then like wrapping some electrical tape around it to keep it in there will do the trick.
Thanks. And I would recommend for people that are maybe new to this, I know that was a big hurdle I had to get over the first time, like flying with my bike. I went with had someone help me take it apart. I took pictures of kind of each step and made notes for myself, to get comfortable with that, depending on, how many things you have to take apart, how you're packing something.
Which
I think one, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, can I add one other thing about flying or traveling with your
Yeah.
bike is that your rear through axle, when you put the through axle in without a wheel, that through axle isn't actually acting as a spacer for your rear triangle because one side is screwed into the through axle, but one side slides. And so as you add like the pressure of all the packing and the pressure of the box or anything, heaven forbid, they put on top of your box and compress that triangle, your triangle can flex. Um, and that could compromise it ultimately. And so new bikes will come with this. You could probably make it with a pipe even, but like having something that acts as a bridge for that rear through axle, and it could be a pipe that you put in between your bike and then you put your through axle through, kind of acting as a hub in a way. Or there are these like plastic things that are just spacers for rear triangles and you can adjust it to the right width for your rear spacing. Um, yeah,
My
plastic
boyfriend made,
transportation, not a metal pipe, but like plastic pipe.
yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. My boyfriend made some like specific ones that were like pieces of wood with little like screws on the end. So like you could just
And
spread
pop it into the hole.
that
Yeah,
little bit and pop them in. Yeah.
that's awesome.
Um, okay, there's one more question about any thoughts on mechanical disc brakes? How often do they break and are they fixable on the road?
Um, I'm not sure if that's like as opposed to hydraulic disc brakes or as opposed to caliper brakes, but I think that mechanical brakes are great. So are hydraulic disc brakes. Some people like mechanical because of how you don't have to rely on the fluid. And so it's like a cable that you would be fixing in the field. That they also do really well in really cold temperatures for that reason. I haven't personally had like failure of any type of disc brake. I'd say like bent rotors, um, and calipers that need adjusting are like the only thing that I've really had to do to my brakes.
One
So
more question came up about flying. Do you need to, or do you typically lower suspension pressure when flying? I guess comment was Air New Zealand requires you to lower the PSI and forks, and then you have to have a shock pump. So do you usually do that when you fly?
yeah, so I think technically the airlines don't want air in anything, which is a little problematic because like air in droppers and air in rear suspension is harder to add than forks. I generally have to take pressure out of my fork to get it to compress for it to fit into my box or my bag. So that's like my main reason. Like I reduce it and then I take a volet strap or something over the fork to keep it compressed. And that's one of the ways that my bikes fit. I do travel with a suspension pump because I generally am bike packing with suspension. And there you can find little ones out there. And as far as like the airline, I think it's just depends on the airline, and a lot of it depends on like if the people checking in TSA or whatever are like bike savvy or not. Because some are gonna know that there's air in there and some are not.
That's all the questions. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, the bike packer mechanicals. This one we've talked about a lot of these in different webinars. Specifically any of the webinars, which there have now been two related to food. And then there was also a webinar on caring for the bike packer body and mind. And that was a really fun one because we got to talk about mindset as well, which we won't get into now. But when I think about bike packer mechanicals, the common ones, like the most common one, I think is bonking. And then we have like the numb contact points, which would be your hands, your feet, and your butt. And then related to that, we have saddle sores. And then there are things that like tend to ache or could develop little injury type situations in your knees, your back, your hips, your neck, and your Achilles. And those are, I think, they're like the five most common areas for bike packers. I didn't list uncommon ones because we're all our bodies are different, and what is common for someone to develop out there a lot comes down to kind of personal history, experience, skills, the environment, etc. But when like teaching and guiding bike packing, the two things that I've experienced the most with people are bonking and then something related to like their butt or in saddle area, which makes sense. Because bikepacking is incredibly physically and energetically demanding and can be hard on the saddle area. So, preventing mechanicals for the bike packer, preventing the bonk. This slide I think I've now used 3 times. Bonking, we'll talk about that. What is it? It's basically like when you have run out of the energy or resources in your body to maintain energy, feeling good, and being happy and having fun. And what that can look like is feeling, and this is can be a fun one, like if you want to contribute to the chat, how you felt when bonking or what you've seen others feel when bonking, the signs and symptoms of bonking for bikepackers. I think most common for me, it's like feeling like I've hit a wall, legs feeling really heavy, um, feeling angry or hangry, feeling like I want to go home, feeling like a little woozy and wobbly, nauseous. Oh yes, disoriented. That's a good one. Generally just like low energy, like needing a nap. Um, and so preventing bonking basically crying. Yes, that is a really spot on. I definitely cry when I bonk most of the time. um, Preventing bonking, the kind of primary ways for doing that are to pace yourself. Remember if you're bike packing, it's probably taking more energy to pedal your bike than when you go on a day ride because there's more weight. We often pedal longer days when we're bike packing. Eating enough for that effort. Again, there are 2 webinars dedicated to this, but like eating every 20 to 30 minutes, making sure that you're getting enough food each hour. Like you want to be eating in that hour for the next hour. And then eating enough when you're at camp and in the morning to be preventing the kind of like cumulative hole that you are digging calorically and therefore energetically through a long trip. And hydrate sufficiently and with electrolytes. And there intentionally aren't numbers in here with like how much water you need, how much electrolytes you need per hour, how many calories or grams of carbs or whatever. per hour because it really is person specific. It really does come down to like your size, your metabolism, your fitness, your environment, like the temperature, the terrain, the type of ride, like your pace, all those things. And so the best advice I have for people is to go out and like in more controlled environments on your longer rides, like play with nutrition and hydration and like see what leads you to not bunking and feels good. And I think the best advice I ever got was from a sports nutritionist I worked with for a long time. And he was like, this was referring to an ultra race I was getting ready for, but it very much applies to bike packing. He's like, Caitlin, if you ever start feeling like you're not having fun, you need sugar. I was like, oh, all right. It's great advice. And it's true. Like one of the first signs that like we're not getting enough is that our brain isn't getting the sugar that we need. And we start to feel that like, ugh, I don't want to be here. Or, this isn't fun. Or I can't do this. So that like internal dialogue can be one of the earliest signs of like, actually, maybe I just need more food. Um, so that's like that was the energy side. Another great way to just like go ahead and set yourself up for success and not having a lot of those other body mechanicals that could possibly happen is to get a professional bike fit. Um, and specify that it's like for endurance riding. That you'll have long days in the saddle, like include if you are carrying a backpack or not. But a lot of the things like your back, your neck, your hands, your butt, a lot of that, your knees, comes down to how your bike is fit and specifically like the reach and the height of your handlebars and then the saddle that you're using and how your saddle is pointed or set up with its angle and its fore aft position in relationship to your leg length and your crank length and where your knees are in relationship to your pedals and your hips and all those things. But um that time and money for a bike fit can be transferred to any of your bikes. Like you can get the measurements and then you know from then on how to set up your bike. And it can be one of the easiest ways to troubleshoot something. Like if you're suddenly your knee is hurting, one of the quickest things you could do is to see if your saddle height is right. And if you know what your saddle height is, then it's easy to know like, oh, actually, it's a little low. That's why my knee hurts. Which like if you've traveled and have packed your bike or maybe it has slipped because of the bags or whatever, like that stuff does happen. Thinking specifically about hand, like we're going to talk about contact points as cyclists, like three parts of our body, technically five-ish, but three main areas of our body are in touch with the bike pretty much all the time. And because of that, those areas can, especially over like long days, and back-to-back days of riding that are often part of bike packing, those areas can present more sensitivity or develop more sensitivity over the length of your ride, of your trip. So, knowing these ahead of time, but then also thinking about them as like ways to troubleshoot when you're out are helpful tools. So, for your hands, your bar height and your reach, like I have very, on a lot of different trips over the years, I have found myself raising my bars for my trip than I ride for day-to-day training and especially for how I race like cross country type races. Um, Having grips that allow you to have different positions and are ergonomic and like distribute and dissipate the pressure really well. Like sadly, the stock grips that come on most bikes are like really narrow and firm and only let you hold the bars like this while still maintaining control of your bike. And there are a lot of grips out there that have like paddles for the palms of your hands, have little bar ends, have like really good foam that increases the diameter of the grip so that like more pressure is dissipated on a broader part of your palm. Things like drop bars can be a great solution for more road and off-road touring because there's a lot of different hand positions little mini like aero bars or proper aero bars also help a lot with that. And then something a lot of people, especially like in the mountain biking side of bike packing, that can be overlooked but make a big difference is having more powerful brakes. Like a standard short travel cross country brake usually has like two piston brakes and short, smaller rotors because they're lighter. But a four piston brake and bigger rotors, like 180s or 203s even, will provide more powerful braking, which also reduces your hand fatigue because you don't have to pull as hard to engage the brakes. And then gloves. In my experience, when my hands are numb, it's really uncomfortable, and the screaming burpees are a terrible experience when they rewarm. And so, just making sure that you can keep your hands warm for the weather that you're going to be riding in. Dish gloves are my favorite hack for that because you can buy them anywhere generally. Get them a few sizes bigger to go over your normal gloves, and suddenly you have really waterproof hands. Feet. Couple things with shoes and generally with like bike packing, like we want to think about how your feet are on the pedals for a while. If you're riding clipless pedals, like more of a trail enduro oriented pedal with the platform can help distribute the pressure of the pedal coming up into your foot. Shoes, like a stiffer shoe is actually going to reduce the fatigue in your foot more when pedaling, but you want a shoe that's also comfortable for walking. And then the type of trip, like if there's a lot of hike bike, you want it to be really comfortable for walking and not give you blisters. So the shoes are like kind of a personal thing and depend a lot on what kind of terrain you're riding on. I tend to size up a half a size because your feet often swell, especially in like really warm trips. And you do want to be able to have room in colder trips to keep your feet warm and dry, which may be um, wearing thicker socks or adding plastic bags even to the inside. And then one thing also, just lastly on shoes, is that like back to the bike fit, a good insole can go a really long way. It's kind of like the saddle for your feet. Like you're in your shoes all day that you're pedaling and you're putting pressure on that. And so having a quality insole that actually supports your foot could go make a big difference in how your feet feel and reduce like numbing and arch fatigue and things like that. And then we have our butts and general saddle areas. There's a lot to talk about this. I did two whole slides in the caring for the bike packer body and mind on this. I'm going to share a YouTube video in the post webinar resources that I made about how to ride chamois free. So hopefully a lot of questions can be answered in that. But the first step for preventing saddle sores, numb butt and saddle area parts, is to have the right saddle. And a saddle fit can help. Borrowing your friend's saddles can help. Like, unfortunately, there isn't like a saddle loaner program that I'm aware of. I wish there was a universal one. But it's common to think, I think it's common for people to be on saddles that are too narrow for their sit bones. And our sit bone width is not correlated to the width of our butt, just so you know. That it's set at the correct angle. Most often, I see saddles that are pointed too far up, and that's going to put a lot of pressure on your pelvis. Cutouts are great in my experience, and I've heard a lot of people with male anatomy agree. um, and cushioning is like a lot of cushion doesn't necessarily equal more comfortable. And then also really firm doesn't also equal like more performance. And so the amount of cushion is actually like dependent on your how your body and pelvis is like shaped and like puts pressure on a saddle, and like the pressure mapping they do in a saddle fit will tell you like what's ideal. And then for shorts and chamois with bike packing, my best advice is to use shorts and chamois that you normally ride on long rides in. For multi-day trips, like longer than 2 days, even for 2 days, like bring two pairs of shorts that have different seam patterns so that you can relieve your skin of the friction in one location of where the seam is. If you're running just shorts without a chamois, like using soft, unabrasive fabric, people who like to bike pack in jorts, like you do have to actually condition your skin for that. Chamois cream can be very useful, and although like I don't tend to need chamois cream if I've been spending a lot of time riding, like I always bring it on long trips in case that develops. There's things like really muddy days, as you need to do like gather more salt in your clothes and need to do more laundry, like there's just more like um abrasion on your skin. And so that's like part of my own bike packer repair kit. So and then going chamois free, in my experience, is can be an incredible opportunity for not having saddle sore issues. And for really, it makes the hygiene side of your shorts easier in my experience because it doesn't take as long for the fabric to dry, and it doesn't like turn into a kind of like diaper type petri dish. But um, yeah, I'm including the tips on chamois free in the post workshop resources, and there's that YouTube video. Um, One thing I just noticed in the comment following up on the like wet and dirty conditions are really tough on your butt, and they totally are. And something that you can do, and Scottish people turn me on to this because they live like every day is a muddy, wet day. But using waterproof shorts or even putting on rain pants or rain knickers for when it's raining from the ground, when it's really splashy, can be something that you can do to preserve the integrity of the actual material of your shorts and prevent saddle sores by not actually letting like mud and grit get work its way through the fabric to your skin. And then the last one in this category are just muscles and joints like Achilles, knees, back, hips, neck. These are all areas that just get a lot of strain for from riding, like being in the cycling position for long days at a time. The best way to prevent them is to get the bike fit and just take time to condition and prepare physically for your ride. Like the neck issues, the back and hip issues, like a lot of that will be fixed through that like intentional conditioning and proper bike fit and setup. But then when you're out there, you can do things like change your saddle height or your shoe pedal saddle position or change your bar height or take weight off your backpack. Like that can be a huge one for relieving pain or pressure on your hands and your saddle. Like there are things you can do to troubleshoot all these things. For people with Achilles issues, like that can develop for cyclists. It can be exacerbated by hike a bike too. But there is a way to tape an Achilles that is really effective at basically eliminating your actual Achilles to need to serve as an Achilles. And so it relieves like pressure and strain from it. And if you just Google that video, you'll suddenly have a great resource and just bring that roll of tape or KT tape, and then you can make an Achilles issue really minor. And then lastly, like with all of these, just knowing what is it that poses challenges for you. Like if you have a history of getting numb hands on like longer day rides, and you're probably going to get numb hands on your bike packing trip. And so trying to proactively address that. And like similar with like back or hip things, like I know that my hips and low back can have a hard time. And so I've changed how my sleep setup is and what I carry. I now carry like a really good sleeping pad, and I make sure I stay warm, and I carry a pillow, and that's also that I sleep well and so that my back doesn't hurt in the morning. Um and so this is where like just reflecting on where are you going, what's your trip like, where are you coming from, like with your personal experience and your fitness and like what's going on with your body, and just embracing it, and not trying to like hard man or hard person yourself through it. Like you can make your trip a lot more enjoyable by taking the time to make sure your bike is set up to serve you. And then for when you do need to take care of things that have gone wrong, we have first aid kits and like bike pack additional self-care stuff. First aid kits are very much based on your skills and comfort in treating first aid related injuries and illnesses. So, this is not a list of what you should have in your first aid kit. This is an example of what I have carried often for a moderate length trip. The numbers are very much dependent on like how many people are in the group, and how long the trip is and how frequently you're going to be able to like get into resupply stuff. And then most importantly, like how long would you have to take care of something before you can get to help? So there's all these kind of factors to consider in what you're bringing. And a first aid, like your level of first aid training will also inform this. On the left side is like kind of my standard kit. Like I carry this on long days in the backcountry. I carry this when I'm skiing. I carry this when I'm bike packing. And it basically, like when I think about cycling, the main things that I'm worried about are like a concussion, um, like sports type injuries that are musculoskeletal, particularly like wrist and ankle related, from like putting your hand down or stepping off really quickly. And then like abrasions or cuts and wound injuries. So these things are basically to address wounds and then help musculoskeletal injuries. And then there's a couple like illness things and painkillers. But that's what this kit is mostly made up of. Over on the lower right side, there are a couple things added to that for prolonged wound care, like um, like if you need to take care of a wound in the backcountry for a little while, like you really do need to be able to keep it clean. That's one of the bigger differences from like this left side. Like I'm getting out really quickly and going to a hospital to like, okay, I'm managing this for a little while. Um, Things to like keep people alive. Like the person I bike pack to is very allergic to, but the person I bike pack with a lot is very allergic to nuts. And so I carry or make sure he's carrying an EpiPen or epinephrine when we go out. And so just like knowing who you're going out with and like what their history is and what they may need. And these are like important, there are some important medical history things, particularly related to allergies and heart conditions that and diabetes, that can be like very important and like life threatening to make sure that everyone is aware of. And so again, this kit is not uh a what everyone should go and replicate, but more like the things you're thinking about, like what is likely, what do you have the skills to take care of, what is the context in terms of your access to help and definitive medical care, and who are you going out with, and like what do they possibly need. And then up in this bigger upper corner, we have kind of like the kit all combined with like repair kit, a first aid kit, some general repair stuff, and then like the bike packer self care. Like there are things like sunscreen, chamois cream, lip balm, feminine hygiene stuff, an inhaler, um, like sore muscle things, your toothbrush, like these all, and then food, of course, as well, and electrolytes. Like these all fall under the bike packer repair kit. And just your ability to take care of yourself out there. And so to follow up on that, like ultimately, just like the bike repair kit, the what you carry is only as useful as your knowledge and skills to use them. And so the strongest piece of recommendation I have, or strongest piece of advice and strongest recommendation I have, is if you are going bike packing anywhere that is like more than an hour from access to like medical care, then getting some sort of wilderness medicine training is so helpful. And it's not only a service to you, it's more a service to the people you're going out with. Like you can treat some things on yourself, but and then hopefully like the people that you are riding with are also getting that training so that they can take care of you if something happens. Because these are things that a lot of them are like pretty unpredictable. like, yeah, they're preventable in some ways through like how we manage risk, but a number of things like illness and injury, like they're accidents and accidents happen. And so, even more importantly than like being able to fix your bike, like being able to fix the person you're with, um, and reduce the severity of their potential injuries or illnesses, and also apply those to your own body is super helpful. Um, these are fairly standardized. There's a lot of providers out there now. The one that I have the most familiar with because I worked for Knowles for a really long time is Knowles Wilderness Medicine. But regardless of who, so this is why the picture is there. But you can type in wilderness first aid, wilderness first responder, providers, and find courses near you. Um, there's also wilderness EMTs, but that's like a whole nother level that bridges into the EMT system. So strongly encourage that. As far as delineating between the two, wilderness first aid is great for like the recreational person. Wilderness first responder is more for like really applicable for extended expeditions and for people who are leading and getting paid to be responsible for other people. There are questions on this, and then the last section is quite short, but the last one is the what to do when you can't fix it. And I think it's just 2 slides. So I think we can be wrapped up.
Yeah, there's not too many questions, so why don't you do that section and we've got a couple of like wrap up and announcements, and then we can do any final questions before people jump off.
Awesome. The unfixables. It's like raise your hand if you've ever been somewhere bikepacking and just really wished you could just get picked up by a helicopter or a spirit and carried away back home to the other side of the world. um, I have been in that situation probably because of bonking. And there are times when our bikes may break in a way that we can't repair, or our bodies do, and whether that's through injury or illness, or there's some sort of other like emergency type issue. And so the first thing in your planning of your trip is to make sure that your route is well researched and that it's not just a line on your GPS that you're about to go follow, but like taking the time. Like I use Ride with GPS and I go onto my desktop interface and I really zoom in and like look at where there are junctions. I find where the most direct way to towns are off my route. Um, have a sense, like given any section of the route, how I would need to bail from it. You can make waypoints, like you can adapt routes to be your own by adding waypoints. And like really good routes look like this one that Sarah Swallow made in the middle, where there's waypoints everywhere. And there's waypoints for water, there's waypoints for camping, there's waypoints off route that tell me like where the bike shop is or where the gas station is. Um, there's waypoints for road crossings, like all of those things, because whether it's just a handwritten note of just route data or pictures of maps that you screenshot or a physical map that you bring or like really well added to route details, those all serve you when you need them because usually you need them when you're not expecting them. I'll even go to the extent sometimes of like if I'm thinking that I might have to change my route, like I'll make a second one that's a detour. And it's like, and so you can see on the left that I have the Sky Islands and AZT route, and then I have the Patagonia Mountain detour. And that was like based on time, but that's something that you can do if you're like, oh, if I actually need to get into a town, I could go this way, and that is a better route than my main route. And then thinking about evacuating off a route. The first thing is like assess the situation. What is the situation? Why do you have to leave? Is it something that you can do yourself? Like, can you pedal or walk out? Slash, can you coordinate with someone that you know, either it's your like a family member or a friend or someone in the area that could meet you at a trailhead and that's like a self evac? Or do you need assistance, which would be someone coming into the route and to get you and to help you get out? with assistance. And assistance can look like anything from horses to ATVs to trucks to helicopters. And there are probably other things like teams of people with like that would like a SAR team, search and rescue team. That could be a type of assistance. And so then something you're thinking about is like, is this an emergency? Like, how does time fit in? Like, can this be a self or assisted evacuation, but it can take time? Like, we have plenty of food and water. But more importantly than food and water, the injury or the situation is like stable and manageable. And it's okay if it takes time. A lot, like I think as satellite communication devices are becoming more common and more people are going to the backcountry without as much, a lot of training, SAR teams are experiencing more emergency calls that aren't emergencies. They're like, well, a flat tire, or like, oh, ran out of food. And suddenly it's like a 911 and a helicopter, which the consequence of that is one, financial for you, but even if that's not a concern, like there is a risk, there's an inherent risk for rescue teams whenever you call on them. And so and they're there to rescue people, but I just want to stress that like those resources are for emergencies and like they're for when you have an injury or an illness that is going to get worse with time and like you need rapid assistance. And that's what it's there for. And we're very lucky to live in a time where we can often get that. One consideration is that like they still need to be able to access you. Like there can be difficult locations for helicopters and rescue teams, and there can be prohibitive weather for them, which also adds risk to them. So with this, you need the ability to communicate. One of a part of all these repair kits is like the communications side. And so we have cell phones and we have satellite communication devices. Cell phones like are great if you are going to have cell service. Um, Generally, like just being able to get a text out is going to be enough to be able to get help in a 911 capacity. And this left picture here is the Backcountry SOS app. It's worth checking out because that app will use your phone's GPS coordinates to identify your location, as you can see here on the screen. And then and it talks like basically sets up texting to 911, which is pretty cool because you just need like the bar that it takes to get the text out. What you need to do is to confirm that where you're going has text to 911 capacities because not all 911 services can take texts. So that's a resource, Backcountry SOS. It's a cool app. It's free. Um, and then the main thing with if you're traveling somewhere without service, like, is it going to be spotty? Like, do you have the ability to like send someone to get service in a pretty short distance? And then the cell phone still works? Or are you going somewhere that's so remote or like out of service that you need a satellite communication device, which could be something like a Garmin InReach type device or a Spot or there are other ones, Dior. And those are cool. A lot of them you can call directly from, and then a lot of them now you can also connect through your phone and it will work through your phone. So you can text through your phone as well. And then like anything electronic, like part of this is making sure you have the battery life or the batteries to keep those things going through an emergency. And then when you are deploying this, like when you're calling for help, you need to identify your specific location, who is involved, and what you need, like the nature of the situation. And then you can add more details from there, but like always starting with where you are. You're calling with this situation and this person or number of people, and then you can go on to like provide a callback number. You can provide like more details like the people or person's age, gender, that sort of thing. But always starting with that like first critical information and like writing it down on a piece of paper so that then you can read it and you don't have to come up with things off the top of your head. So that's like the less than 5 minute course on how to make an emergency call. There are great resources also for kind of backcountry rescue. Like you can look into getting trip insurance, or like annual adventure type insurance. Like the American Alpine Club is a good example of like if you have a level of membership, it's like $100 a year or something, then you have this insurance for rescues as well. And they have resources then for how to initiate that rescue. So there are some neat things that you can look into, and that will all vary depending on where you're going. And especially if you're traveling internationally, like it's worth figuring out like what is the emergency protocol? Like how do you get help? And that's it. That's the end of the webinar.
Awesome. Well, I do have one exciting announcement if folks want to hang on with us for like 1 or 2 more minutes. Just first, I want to thank our sponsors for making this series possible. We had three great sponsors for this series: Revelate Design, Shimano, and Old Man Mountain. Um, as we didn't really do an intro on bikepacking routes today, but we are a national nonprofit, and we, primarily rely on donations from individuals, like everyone on this call, to keep the organization going. So we'll send some more information after the workshop. Kate will send some follow-up materials. And while this is the last of our three-part series, we are going to be announcing next week a brand new webinar series that's going to be focused around our routes, and bringing in some of our advocacy work. And so Kate will actually be back with our other co-founder, Kurt Refsnyder, later this month, I think February 25th, if you want to mark your calendars. And they're going to be doing a whole webinar focused on our Bears Ears Loops bikepacking route, and talking about the importance of the Bears Ears Monument and national monuments in general. And as you know, there's a lot at stake right now with public land. So I think that'll be a very timely conversation, and we hope to see y'all there.
Thank
Anything
you.
else, Kate?
No, that's it. There will be a very detailed additional PDF resource. So we could go on about all this forever. Thanks all for joining.
Yeah. The date is February 25th, for the next workshop. Keep an eye out on social media or your emails. We'll be announcing that soon. Okay. Thanks, everyone.